Hey everyone, Uncle Jess here. This project that I'm working on has started off as one thing and quickly evolved into multiple sub projects here that I'm very excited to share with you all. And it initially started off with me wanting to make a video about the difficulties of printing with black resin. For whatever reason, I have the hardest time getting successful prints with black resin. And case in point, I went to make this video utilizing a file that was created by Grant Cross that was shared over on the Elgoose Saturn Facebook group of this melted Darth Vader helmet. And lo and behold, the print failed on me. And instead of just throwing this out, it looked way too cool for me to just toss it aside. So I decided I wanted to try and salvage this failed 3D print and see if we could turn it into something really cool. And after getting the print all cleaned up, I had this idea that, it would look really interesting if we could fit a skull inside this Vader helmet. So instead of just going online and trying to download and mix it into the actual file here for my needs, I decided I was going to try and attempt to 3D model one myself using Nomad Sculpt and my iPad. I've done a number of videos on this app previously that you can find in the corner up above, where you can actually do 3D modeling on a tablet or even your phone. This isn't limited to iPads. It's also available on Android devices as well. And it's a really straightforward and easy to use 3D modeling app that I think is only still $15, and it's very much like ZBrush, but on a tablet. I easily spent about an hour or two just playing around with this and going from iteration to iteration, relying on those references. I wasn't going for super detailed, accurate iteration of a skull. I just wanted something that looked kind of stylized and cool. And in fact, even after this project has been over, I've still been playing around and modeling on this skull in the evening and love actually working with it. And I might just have to do a standalone print of this skull. And for me to get a better idea of how the skull that I've modeled would fit inside our failed Vader helmet 3D print, what I ended up using is another app on my phone called Polycam 3D, which allows me to use pictometry, which is a process of taking a whole bunch of different photos, and it's going to then process those and stitch them together into one 3D object. And I honestly wasn't sure how well this is going to work since the actual 3D print was black and it was a little bit hard to see all the details, but I was a little shocked to see how well it actually performed after processing that file. I was then able to export that directly from my phone and send it back over to my iPad. But then the next issue that I ran into was it wasn't the proper scale. So what I did was use some digital calipers to measure the width of the Vader helmet failed print that I had, then went into Tinkercad, which is a free 3D modeling app that you can use on your computer or tablets or phones or basically any web browser, and realized that this was about 50 millimeters wide. So I just created a very basic shape of a bar and then exported that, then brought that also back into Nomad Sculpt and allowed me to scale everything up to fit according to that bar. I was then able to take that skull shape that I had modeled and maneuver it inside of the actual Vader helmet. And we have a whole bunch of pieces there that are going to be overlapping, and I'm not too concerned about that because what I'm going to use the trim tool, which is going to allow me to carve away at the skull that I've modeled out that more or less better fits against the Vader helmet. I was also using some of the transparency options or the opacity options for our shapes just to get a better overall idea and look and feel. I also painted those using the very basic paint functions that are in Nomad Sculpt so that I could get a visual representation of if it looked like a skull or if the Vader helmet was like a shade of blue or purple, just so it popped a little bit here on my iPad. Once I was happy with that overall shape, I then took that skull, exported it out, and sent it over to my computer where I could then bring it over into Chitubox and then get it properly hollowed out, supported, and printed here for us to check out. And that's more or less where we're at right now and why my desk is looking so messy, because I ended up having to carve out the bottom of the Vader helmet using my Dremel, and make sure that you're working with some protective gear, goggles, a face mask there, even gloves. I should have also probably been wearing long sleeves while doing this, but you don't want any of that resin dust getting inside your lungs or in your eyes. And after a few initial 3D prints here, I wasn't 100% happy with how it looked So I've gone off and reprinted those slightly larger and reoriented here on the Elegoo Mars 3. I'm also using Elegoo's clear blue resin for the actual skull pieces here, and I'm hoping it'll give it a little bit of a Ghost of Anakin look and feel. All right, so after a good bit of Dremel work there and modifications to both of the pieces, I've got the Vader helmet here carved out, but everything on this looks pretty good. I've cleaned it back up as best I can. It's still a little bit dirty, which actually looks fairly nice. I then carved the heck out of this one here and ended up at a place that I'm very happy with, or at least pretty happy with how it looks currently. But now I need to try and make this more transparent. And what I'm gonna do is use the other skulls that were the smaller test pieces here. And I'm gonna do with one of them, I'm gonna dip it back in the resin and then just cure it and see how it goes. And then the other, I'm gonna coat with some clear coat. All right, so I've never tried this before, but someone recommended it over on one of my previous YouTube videos of just dipping the print back in resin and then letting it pool off and then directly curing it under the UV light. So fingers crossed this doesn't make a huge mess. After letting the dip skulls cure a bit, you can actually see the comparison between the ones that I've clear coated and let sit out in the sun versus the ones that I've dipped in resin and cured under the UV light. And the ones that I left out in the sun, unfortunately, I just left a little bit too long and it's kind of green now, not so much blue. And the resin dipped option worked really well for this. So if you have clear 3D prints, try dipping it back in the resin and then just UV curing it. I then grabbed our melted Vader helmet and used some of the leftover dust from when we drilled it all out and made room for the skull to actually help weather it and dirty it back up. I also then used a little bit of silver rub and buff to add some accents and highlights, especially on the front portion where you saw that little metal bit, but then it also helped some of the other areas and the details of this actual print pop a little bit more with a very, very light dusting of the rub and buff. And then it was time to shove the skull inside the Vader helmet and see how everything properly fits. And it doesn't exactly look the way I was envisioning it to. I think I need to carve it out even further for the skull to be more flush with the opening of the Vader helmet here. But overall, I still think it was a pretty cool looking project. And I'm honestly very happy with me taking the time and jumping into Nomad Sculpt and actually sculpting out my own skull for this 3D printed project. And I even went back over on my Elegoo Saturn S with that same black resin and reprinted the skull that I 3D modeled and everything printed properly this time around. I did make a few slight setting tweaks as well for the black resin, which I think has helped immensely. I then decided to make a clear green variation of the skulls and printed that on the Elegoo Mars 3 and then clear coated those as well. And I forgot to remove the supports on the inside. I was going to use some tweezers and now I can't even get in there to remove them. Everything's just kind of cured in place, but it still looks very cool. And even though this project isn't exactly what I was hoping it to be and what it turned out to be, I'm so happy that I spent the time to actually learn Nomad Sculpt, at least the bare basics of it, and feel a good bit more comfortable getting in there in 3D modeling and attempting to print some of my own things and going in and trying to repair and utilize this failed 3D print and turn it into something that I can actually display around here. I think it would actually look a lot better if I put a little LED light on the inside as well so that the skull was a little bit more illuminated, give that glowing effect. But for now, it looks pretty cool. I might, again, carve it out and see if I can get it a little bit more flush with the opening. If you're interested in that, follow me on Instagram and Twitter and the TikToks. I'll more than likely be posting some updates here on that. I do want to take a minute to say thank you again to today's video sponsor, which is Elegoo, the makers of the Elegoo Saturn S, the Elegoo Mars 3, the wash and cure station, and the black resin, and even the clear resin that I was using in today's video. If you are interested in any of Elegoo's products, you'll find links to those down below. The machines print so amazing, and if you're interested in making your own 3D designs, I highly recommend grabbing one of Elegoo's resin 3D printers. And I also want to say a big thank you to all of my Patreon supporters for your continued support of me making content here on the channel. If you're interested in my resin 3D printing settings, including the settings that I used for the black resin here on the Elegoo Saturn S, I'll have that over in the Patreon. But let me know what you thought about this all over the place project here that I've made. And if you're interested in printing one of the melted Vader helmets from Grant Cross. I'll have links to the Elgoose Saturn Facebook group where you can find that and print one for yourself. Hey, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye now.